UN Secretary General has raised a warning against a great fracture as US President Donald Trump declares the future does not belong to globalists, but rather to patriots. China met with other countries at the Ancient Civilizations Forum at the United Nations in an effort to draw upon experiences from millennium-old civilizations and seek out wisdom for the modern age. So what is the danger of a great fracture? What aspects of ancient civilizations can have a positive impact on the modern era, and how can they provide a source of soft power for modern multidimensional international relations? To discuss these issues and more, I'm very happy to be joined in the studio by Madame He Wenping, Senior Research Fellow with the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, Anna Tangen, Current Affairs Commentator, and via satellite in Taipei by Professor M.D. Nalapad, Vice Chair of Manipur University's Advanced Research Group. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Welcome to Dialogue. All politicians, regardless of their political institutions and values they accept, believe that they behave in a civilized manner and that prosperity of the individual countries thrive on their unique understanding about the strength of their individual civilizations. What is their strength and what are the advantages about the Chinese civilization? Because China is regarded as a civilization state.
Yeah, of course. China, we have enjoyed more than 5,000 years, those history. And during our past those journey, and of course our ancestors has developed a lot of different kinds like arts and also like painting. So a lot of things that's built. This is becoming the contribution for the global different civilization. So we also can refer like India, like Egypt. So all those like even the Middle East, those area. So I think from the Chinese perspective, we will also contributed like our religion, like Buddhism. Even now we establish a lot of Confucius institutes globally. So Confucius offered us a lot of those very wise those opinion, those philosophy, and also we have invented like the four different those inventions like powder, like how to print, and so all of that I think we carried on, and until now this civilization not disappeared in the past. Now we have continued. So I think all those threats, when we review back, and then offered us a great these resources to continue to develop the new civilization. So civilization is like a river of the water, like the river, flowing always from the upstream and always running forward.
But prophets and advocates who are proud of their own individual civilizations say they stand for universality. The Chinese civilization, which is known for respecting hierarchical order politically and political ethics, focusing on unity, discipline, collectivism, may not see eye to eye with what Americans and Europeans stand for, because they respect law and rule-based. In a rule-based world, they have a very different opinion about what Chinese civilization actually stands for. Let me first of all take a quick look at a special program that I did a few months ago on Dialogue of Civilizations. This program is actually a group of highlights concerning the voices of different representatives from civilization states. Let's take a quick look.
When Samuel Huntington wrote The Clash of Civilization in 1993, actually 92, and then eventually expanded in the book, the basic assumption is that civilizations are going to clash against each other because the values are different. But the problem is that civilizations clash with each other only when one civilization tries to invade the other civilizations and impose its values on others. That's a problem. Democracy should be number one, inclusive. Every one of us is part of it. That's why we rule of people. Number two should be open. And number three should be tolerant, allow others to exist. In Chinese civilization, the one very important principle in Chinese civilization is that we don't do unto others the things we don't want others to do upon us.
I don't believe any old civilization, ancient civilization, believes in the clash of civilization. What happened with the United States and with Samuel Huntington, we know, that he has been commissioned to do this study after the collapse or about the collapse of the Soviet Union to find some enemies in order to push for the industrial military complex in the United States to produce weapons and so on and so forth. We believe in the, as my friend said, multilateralism. Multilateralism means compromises, means you give and take, means win and win situations. It doesn't mean at all domination of one over the other. Tolerance is the key word for establishing peace, establishing coexistence, again, stability in the whole universe.
Well, I'd like to talk about what we're talking about, this clash of civilizations. Frankly, I don't know why people are taking Huntington so seriously. You can't combine 1 billion people and say that they're all alike. I mean, whether it's in China or in India or in Egypt or in Greece, you'll find thousands of different types of people. Now, take the case of Christianity, a very noble faith. The earliest church, if I understand, was in Syria. I've been to that part of Syria, the Patriarch of Antioch, and it's very close to Bethlehem, the birthplace of Lord Jesus Christ. And frankly, the Christians in the United States who talk so much about Christianity, they have no problem in giving guns and money to people who are butchering these Orthodox Christians in Syria.
And I contend that today the most important thing is to think about a global civilization, a global culture, something that would be produced not by friction and by fission, to use physics, not fission, not conflict, but fusion and integration. This is where we're heading. This is where our kids are heading. So let's think about a global culture, a global civilization. This is what is being created now. Ecological civilization is a part of a global culture, already here, with us, with our kids.
These are voices representing the confidence of the individual civilization states like Greece, Egypt, India, and China, of course. Now, State Councilor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi hosted, as a rotating chairman, Ancient Civilization Forum on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. Anna, why do you think he calls for cooperation instead of confrontation to usher in an era of co-prosperity? He seems to deliver a message to coincide with the appeal from General Secretary Guterres to avoid having fracture or parallel world order.
Well, it's incredibly important at this stage when you have the most powerful leader in the world calling for, in essence, a separation. He does not want a multilateral world. He doesn't want a global situation. He just says patriotism, which is another word for make my country great again, and you can insert whatever country's there. The lessons, I think the important thing when you start looking at civilizations are the lessons of civilizations. They have risen and fallen. They have seen and have gained the wisdom of the ages. And that is what is most important when we're looking at this. I don't care about Samuel Huntington's view on this thing. What I think is important is what you can learn from it and avoid. In these particular cases, as Dr. Nalapat put out, luckily we have him on the show today, you have a lot of actions which go against having a civilized world. In addition to that, we now face an extinction-level event of our own making in terms of climate change. So we have to take the wisdom of the ages and start applying it instead of trying to invent new ideas based on our own selfishness.
Let me cross over to Professor Nalapat, who's standing by in Taipei. Professor Nalapat, what do you make of your own remarks as the dialogue of civilizations about the ridiculous assumption that 1 billion people should be reviewed as the same? What has made you feel so confident about, for example, the strength of the Indian civilizations?
Well, I'd like to say that the reality is today, in the World Wide Web of world in which we live in the world of interconnected commerce that we live in, a real patriot will be an individual who understands the importance of working together with other countries. Any effort to either dominate other countries or to be apart from other countries is doomed to failure in today's world. Even in the 20th century we saw some countries tried to dominate and some countries tried to be apart from other countries. They finally failed. So I think the reality is that we are all part of an interconnected world. And I was very heartened to see millions of young people across the world unite for the sake of the environment. So this basically shows that those who believe that the world can be segmented into watertight compartments, they are completely wrong.
Professor Nalapad, one major event that has fundamentally and profoundly changed the world is the September 11th terrorist attacks. Now, the United States invaded Afghanistan and Iraq as a result of the rising Islamic extremism, I mean religious extremism. So what do you make of the impact of religious extremism and the dangers of, say, going radical, getting rid of the idea of building co-prosperity? And we see much of the extremism comes from the volatile Middle East region.
Well, I'd like to point out that...
Yes, go ahead. And what do you think of my question that I raised for Professor Nalapad? September the 11th.
Yeah, first off, let's take a look at September 11th. It was a major tragedy. I was supposed to be there that day. There were people who died who I knew, and things. It was a terrible tragedy.
Why the hate crimes, the hate campaign?
But this is the problem. I mean, you've had millions, tens of millions of people dying around the world, and that does not seem to strike the same chord. It was a mistake by the U.S. to go into Afghanistan and Iraq. It has further destabilized the situation. I don't think, other than John Bolton, there are many people who believe this was the right thing to do and that they would do it again. And this is the problem that we in the U.S. don't understand. We think that we can just wade in and solve it militarily, and that has not been the case. If we had looked at a longer-term level in terms of civilizations, how other countries have handled things in the past and tried to figure out a way to deal with it, it would have been much better, not only for us, but the world as entirely. We're going to end up spending $4 trillion on these two wars, and there's no end in sight at this point in time. So economically, politically, and from a social stability point of view, it's been a terrible failure.
One important repercussion arising from the ramifications of September the 11th is either the Color Revolution or Arab Revolution. Taking Egypt as an example, its foreign minister also attended the forum. Ancient Egypt is full of wisdom in creating wealth of intellectual property for the whole world and for human civilization. What do you think of the efforts of President Sisi to quell the Muslim Brotherhood uprising and to restore the secular governance of an Islamic state?
Well, we have seen this up and down, in the past years of the Egyptian political development. So, to my understanding, the reason for the President Sisi to crack down the Muslim Brotherhood is because this religion now is go too far. He think now is moving to the all the way even to the extremists, those kind of idea. When the former President Morsi was in power, and then they even broke down their own promise, because before they took the power, they are saying, oh, we will not take too many powers in our hands. We will keep a balance between the civilian and then even military. Yeah, this kind of their share will be maintained, and even the court. But later on, they go to even the court, even take over the power from the court, judicial system. So it has gone too far, and then I think squeezed out those space for other forces in Egypt. Because in Egypt, there are three kinds of big forces are there. One is civilian, another is religion, another is military. And the military used to enjoy the biggest share of those power. But when you are dare enough to, to trying to squeeze out, those share used to be enjoyed by military, and then you get this counter, this response coming from the military. I think President Sisi used to be the defense minister by himself, of course. So even now we have seen the new round of those protests now is happening on the Cairo, on the street, and even in other cities. So for those countries, Egypt is one of those like Middle Eastern countries. They used to be have a very long historical those heritage. Yes, that's true, but this is two sides of one coin. One side is enjoy lots of those traditional culture, those wisdom, but another side is sometimes if you cannot develop yourself, innovative, combined with the old culture and the new modern culture, sometimes you carry too much on your shoulder, and then you cannot moving forward in a very speedy way.
You know,
I think somebody who's looking on the outside of this will say that obviously being part of an ancient civilization does not necessarily confer the same wisdom that is necessary to rule. I mean, having a military government in there, a strong central government, might harken back to the days of the pharaohs and things like that. But it's not necessarily a modern condition. So
but the United States still provides backing for the government in Cairo.
Yes, I mean, it's part of a very complex situation that the U.S. has brought about in the Middle East.
Former President Mubarak felt he had been abandoned. He had been betrayed by the American ally.
And he was betrayed. I mean, he was extremely bitter about this. Obviously, we withdrew our support for him.
Now, part of the volatility that characterizes the scenario in the Middle East comes from the sectarian violence. Persons disagree with the Arabs, and we see the rise of Kurds, and we see Turks get angry with the Kurds, and we see civil war in Syria between different tribes. And to say nothing of the disasters in Libya that led to the killing of one American ambassador. General Sisi, or President Sisi of Egypt, drew a lot of inspirations from the real example of China's success over the past 4 decades. Exactly 4 decades ago, Anna, Islamic Revolution led to the hostage-taking approach that led to the economic sanctions imposed by Washington. Grand Ayatollah Khomeini came back from exile in Paris and ousted the Tsar. So we saw a lot of instability coming from the export of Islamic fundamentalism or extremism. Today, I mean, I'm not talking about a number of crusades between Christians and the Muslims in history. 4 of them in my living memory. And when we put all of these chaos into one perspective regarding better governance of the world, don't you think we should agree to disagree, and we should learn how to live and let live? We should, share the same future in a commonwealth.
Absolutely. I mean, the wisdom of the ages is don't interfere, don't set up puppet governments and expect that you'll be able to rule over another area. You can go back to the way that the colonialists, Britain and France, redrew the maps in Africa and in the Middle East. It was deliberately set up so that a minority would rule over a majority. Now, the idea was that they would be completely dependent on their former colonial masters. This is the kind of wisdom that escapes people. They tried to be a little bit too clever in setting these things up for their own advantage.
Despite the glow of all the advantages concerning globalization and the dynamic process of globalization, we see the rising tensions of a trade war between the 2 biggest economies. Let me go back to Professor Nalapart. Now, the West is very proud that the huge success of the Industrial Revolution a couple of centuries back, particularly the prosperity in most Western countries with the end of the Second World War, led to the growing confidence that China should be one of us. Okay, Americans and Europeans say loud and clear, China should be one of us after 4 decades of engagement. But today, China is obviously walking a different path. It wants to, navigate a different course of development. President Trump says we should give credit to patriots, not globalists. But China says we should support the process of globalization. Now, what's wrong with, different mindsets? For the Chinese, we feel strongly that the Westerns are so assertive, but they accuse China of being assertive. So, on the other hand, some say you cannot argue with the success of China. Under the communist leadership, So most Westerns have been left puzzled, and they don't know why, because they are so proud of their own values, their own political institutions. They say they represent the universality of their values and of the values of human society. What do you think from the Indian perspective?
Well, you know, I'd like to say, as someone who has studied the political development of several countries, today, whether it's India, it's Turkey, it's Russia, the United States under Donald Trump, Boris Johnson in the UK, the countries that have elections for leadership, they're all choosing strong leaders. And I think this is because of the fact that China has had strong leaders, and China has made so much of progress. So the Chinese example is having an impact on the quote-unquote democratic world, and therefore strong leaders, Modi for example in India. Now they are being chosen by the voters because of the belief that now you have China, which has made so much of progress under strong leadership. So let's also get strong leaders for our own country so we can make progress. So that example of China has actually been, in a sense, very influential in affecting election results across the world. I only want to say that, frankly, I don't believe there's a fracture. It is competition. And, for example, in Africa, China is competing with some European countries. India is competing with China. This is good for Africa. Competition is good for the world. So you have a Chinese-led supply chain. You have a US-led supply chain. That gives more alternatives for the rest of the world to choose. So I frankly believe that what we call a fracture is in reality competition, and I don't think it's harmful at all.
Right. Cooperation instead of confrontation, that's the centerpiece delivered by State Councilor.
Yes, but I'm going to have to disagree with my dear friend. I mean, he's a wonderful man who sees tremendous potential in the world, but the fact is the decoupling between the U.S. and China is not good. It's not good competition. What you're going to do is you have two separate entities that are competing in the same area, and this is not and it's going to be wasteful. And quite frankly, if these countries are, in essence, subsidizing what they're doing, it's not true competition. It is just simply a competition for influence. And that could turn nasty if it goes beyond the economic norms into military political.
We have good reasons to respect the success and prosperity of Western economies and Western governments and the benefits of their people. The issue is Wenping. When we review the strength of Western civilizations, we look at the real example of both Greece and Rome. Their civilizations provide the political philosophy, their respect for law and science. Of course, 100 years ago, in the May the 4th movement, the students in Beijing said we should respect Mr. Science and Mr. Democracy. The issue is, in the West-centric discourse, as I said earlier, unless you could be one of us, you'll be alienated, you'll be regarded as a rival and the enemy. Relationship quickly gets so nasty overnight with President Trump taking office. So what should be the way out? What should be the silver lining?
Yeah, there's no doubt. Human civilization, we have been benefited a lot from those traditional, the old Greece, those philosophy like Mr. Democracy, Mr. Science. Yeah, I graduated from Peking University, so I benefit a lot from those ideas. But I think now we see the President Trump coming out from the United States, but it's not a single phenomena in the United States. We also see the similar things now in the European countries, like in the Italy, the Five-Star Movement, this party now also rising. Their slogan is also called Italy first. And we're also seeing like rightist movement in the France, and then even in those Nordic countries, in Sweden. So it's not a single phenomena there. So it shows some kind of, I think, the side product of this globalization. Yeah, this era we call era of information, era of globalization. That's why China now is calling for inclusive globalization, making globalization more equality, because now some countries, they are being marginalized. like Africa continent, now hasn't kept the pace with this rapid now we even call it the fourth industrial revolution. But we still see a lot of people are still, living below the poverty line. So it's not fair, it's not balanced. So even for those very modern, advanced, like American economy, now we hear very often, like President Trump said, it is not fair for America, it's not fair for us.
Despite all the merits of ancient civilizations, what do you think of the importance of e-commerce that may allegedly close the gap between rich and poor? The digital gap should be closed with e-commerce, and
that was the theory, but it actually hasn't happened. What you've seen is now the billionaires are from e-commerce. Those are the new ultra-wealthy, the new robber barons of our age. And unfortunately, it's not sharing the wealth. What you're having is a lot of these companies, Google, they're becoming monopolistic.
Alibaba, Huawei,
they're becoming monopolistic, and they're imposing the
e-commerce.
It's not competition. So, these are things that you have to learn. But I think that the lesson of civilization is don't try to impose your will. It is just as bad to imposing radical religious deals as it is even well-intentioned. American exceptionalism is still the same thing. They're saying that you are not normal, you are not right, unless you embrace our version of liberal democratic capitalism. Now, no matter how well-meaning that may be, it doesn't fit with the existing civilizations of the world.
Instead of talking smart about political philosophy, political institutions, values, universal ones in particular, we are perhaps barking at the wrong tree. We should instead have talked about the use of a digital currency to transcend one single currency that's pegged to the sovereignty of one nation state. That's very dangerous. Look at the impact and reasons of financial meltdowns that broke out in Wall Street. So when politicians and policymakers, elites like Professor Nalapata, like Anna Tangen, when they talk about advantages of ancient civilizations, we should talk more, look into the future and talk about the digital currency so that people in developing countries could benefit from equal access to a universal currency. Right?
It's not quite that simple. Digital currencies as a replacement for paper currencies is not going to change much. It does help governments collect taxes because you can tax at point of transaction. You can keep track of things a lot easier if you don't have the physical cash. But getting there is very difficult. As India has found out, the demonetization did have consequences. People were hurt by that. And so you have to be very careful going about it. But it is not a situation where if you have one currency in the world, you solve all the problems.
The Chinese monetary authorities are very cautious about Bitcoin. So instead, they talk about the fifth generation of telecommunication of Huawei, but Huawei is brutally boycotted by the presidency of Donald Trump. What do you think of, say, the use of digital technology to close the gap between rich and poor so that we'll level the playing field and we'll enjoy co-prosperity in a community of shared future? That's what President Xi Jinping calls for.
Yeah, honestly, I'm quite promising about this digital economy. So, for example, like when I was, spending my time in the U.S. in 1994, by that time I was envoy, like this check, and then because by that time we haven't used those at all. But now I think my American fellow now envy China's way, because in my pocket I don't have too much cash now. I just use my mobile, scan here, scan there, and pay by the e-pay. So things developed, sometimes beyond
online payment has become a universal language that knows no boundary. It's not just the issue of human rights. It's also about the remarkable progress of digital technology. That will help all peoples benefit from this very confident understanding about globalization. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.